How David Goggins built unbreakable mental toughness. David Goggins is not just a name. It's a movement. A mindset. A symbol of what it means to take control of your life no matter where you start. He didn't come from money, comfort, or privilege. He came from pain, trauma, and darkness. Yet today, he stands as one of the toughest human beings on earth. A former Navy SEAL, Army Ranger, ultramarathon runner, pull-up world record holder, best-selling author, and global inspiration, David Goggins forged a mental strength so powerful, it shattered every boundary of human potential. But how exactly did he build that kind of toughness? What did he go through, and what can you learn from his transformation? This is the step-by-step breakdown of how David Goggins built unbreakable mental toughness, and how you can too. Childhood trauma, the foundation of pain. Before David Goggins became the embodiment of mental toughness and grit, before the ultramarathons and Navy SEAL accolades, he was just a young boy living in fear. Born on February 17, 1975, in Buffalo, New York, David's early life was defined not by joy or safety, but by trauma, silence, and survival. His father, Toughness Goggins, owned a roller skating rink, a seemingly lively place filled with music, lights, and entertainment. But behind the walls of that business, and even more so behind the doors of their home, lay a different story. A story soaked in violence, fear, and control. Toughness was not just a hard worker, he was a tyrant. From the outside, he appeared charismatic and successful, but inside the home, he ruled with brutality. He physically abused David, his older brother, and their mother. David recalls nights when he would lie in bed, trembling, trying to guess what mood his father would come home in. The wrong answer meant beatings. As a child, he learned early that staying silent and invisible were sometimes the only ways to survive. The psychological scars ran deep, embedding themselves into the very core of his identity. He learned to walk on eggshells, to anticipate danger, to distrust affection. His young mind didn't understand why this was happening, but it learned that the world wasn't safe. At school, things weren't any better. David, already carrying the emotional weight of home, now had to navigate a school system where he was one of the only black students. Racism was overt and constant. He was called racial slurs, laughed at, and alienated. To make matters worse, he suffered from an undiagnosed learning disability that made reading nearly impossible. He couldn't understand what was on the board, couldn't follow along in books, and felt stupid every day. Teachers assumed he was lazy or slow. Students mocked him. And so, Goggins developed what many children in pain develop, a fake version of himself. He pretended to be okay, pretended to laugh when they laughed at him, and pretended not to care when the world ignored or ridiculed him. He was building a mask, layer by layer, hiding the broken boy inside. Despite everything, David's mother, Jackie Goggins, was his anchor. She eventually found the courage to leave Toughness, taking David and his brother with her. But leaving wasn't the end of the nightmare. They had no money, no stability, and no idea where their next meal would come from. David saw his mother cry many nights, struggling to keep the family afloat. He learned early on that life doesn't hand you strength, you have to earn it. But at this stage, David wasn't strong. He was wounded. Traumatized. And though the physical abuse stopped, the emotional damage remained. He carried it into every interaction, every school day, every relationship. Trauma doesn't vanish with distance, it travels with you. In this vulnerable state, David also started developing physical insecurities. He began gaining weight, especially in his teenage years. Food became a source of comfort. Television became an escape. Exercise didn't exist in his vocabulary. He avoided sports, avoided attention, and began to live in his own isolated world of shame. His self-image collapsed. In his mind, he wasn't just failing at school or suffering at home, he believed he was fundamentally broken. And yet, within this deep pit of despair, something strange started to grow. Not confidence. Not belief. But anger. David Goggins wasn't ready to rise yet, but he was beginning to boil. That anger at his father, at his bullies, at his own perceived weakness, started to simmer beneath the surface. He would later describe this as one of his most powerful tools, rage harnessed not for revenge, but for transformation. Still, during these early years, he didn't know how to use it. He was still just surviving. He saw the world as a place that punishes you for existing. And he had no idea that the very pain he wanted to escape would one day become his fuel. One of the most critical realizations about Goggins' childhood is this: pain is not what breaks you, it's what you believe about the pain. At that time, David believed the abuse and racism meant he was worthless. But later in life, he would reframe that suffering as the very thing that made him capable of withstanding more than most people could ever imagine. The beatings, the insults, the loneliness, they became his training ground. But not yet. At this stage, he was a ghost of the man he would become. He was quiet, overweight, academically behind, and mentally drained. Teachers didn't expect much of him. Friends were scarce. Life had taught him not to dream. But Jackie Goggins never gave up on her son. She planted seeds of belief in him. She told him he was capable, even when he couldn't see it. She worked multiple jobs, sacrificed everything, and pushed education as the way out. She reminded him of his worth, even as the world tried to erase it. And that mother-son bond would later become one of Goggins' deepest emotional anchors. She believed in his potential long before he did. In interviews and in his best-selling book Can't Hurt Me, Goggins describes his childhood as hell. And yet, he doesn't use it as an excuse. He uses it as a beginning. Because here's the truth: everyone faces hardship, but not everyone builds from it. What separates Goggins is that he eventually learned to convert suffering into strength. Not through luck, not overnight, but through a radical transformation that began with acknowledging the truth: his childhood wasn't fair, but it was his. And it was up to him what he would do with it. The trauma didn't define him, but it did shape him. The darkness became a mirror. And slowly, the boy who had been silent for so long would begin to speak, not with words, but with action. Decades later, that same boy would inspire millions around the world, not because he avoided hardship, but because he embraced it, overcame it, and showed others that your beginning does not have to be your end. Racism and learning disabilities crushed confidence. After escaping the violence of his father, David Goggins hoped for peace, but what he faced next crushed whatever was left of his confidence. Moving to a mostly white neighborhood in Brazil, Indiana, he found himself isolated once again, this time, because of the color of his skin. Every day in school was a mental battlefield. He was one of the only black students, and the racism was raw and direct. Students hurled slurs. Teachers ignored him. He was laughed at, bullied, and made to feel less than human. But racism wasn't the only enemy. Goggins struggled deeply with learning. Words danced on the page. Reading felt like torture. Comprehension was slow. He had a learning disability that went unnoticed for years. Teachers assumed he was lazy or dumb. They didn't see the pain behind his silence. David began to believe the worst thing any child can believe: I'm not good enough. These two forces, racism and failure in school, shattered his self-worth. He started to stutter. He would hide in the bathroom for hours to avoid being seen. His anxiety grew. He began to feel invisible and ashamed. Every day was survival, not learning. And slowly, he stopped trying. He pretended not to care, but deep inside, he hated who he was becoming. He couldn't read like the others. He couldn't speak without shaking. He couldn't even look people in the eye. So, he built a fake version of himself, quiet, withdrawn, and hidden in plain sight. He became a master of blending in, of not drawing attention, of disappearing. But this pain became fuel. Goggins remembers these years not with bitterness, but with purpose. He calls them essential. Because those humiliations, being called the N-word, failing tests, being laughed at, taught him what it felt like to be broken. And years later, they would give him the hunger to become unbreakable. These experiences taught Goggins a brutal truth: no one is coming to save you. The world doesn't owe you fairness. If you want to rise, you have to do it yourself. You have to build your own voice. So while these early chapters of his life crushed his spirit, they also planted the seeds of transformation. Racism taught him to fight. Failure taught him to grow. And isolation taught him to become his own best friend. Goggins didn't know it then, but these broken pieces would become the weapons he would later use to dominate life. His mind wasn't weak. It was just waiting to be trained. Obesity, depression, and hitting rock bottom. By his early 20s, David Goggins was physically alive, but mentally, emotionally, and spiritually dead. The abuse, racism, and constant failure had taken their toll. He had given up on himself. He was nearly 300 pounds, eating fast food every day, drinking milkshakes and donuts to escape his thoughts. He worked a job he hated, spraying cockroaches at night in dirty restaurants. It was dark, lonely, and degrading. He hated every second of it, but he felt like he deserved it. His inner voice told him this was the best he could ever be. He had stopped dreaming. There were no goals, no ambitions, no fight left. The TV became his escape. Food became his drug. He lived in a small apartment with his mother, pretending everything was okay. But inside, he was sinking. Deep depression set in. His body hurt. His spirit was numb. He would avoid mirrors because he hated what he saw. When he did look, all he saw was failure. He felt weak, ashamed, and invisible. Every morning, he would wake up tired, physically from the weight, mentally from the shame. His life had become a loop: work, eat, watch TV, sleep, repeat. He avoided discomfort at all costs. No workouts. No running. No effort. Because effort meant facing pain, and he'd been avoiding pain his whole life. But what haunted him most wasn't the job or the weight, it was knowing he could be more, but he wasn't trying. That quiet regret grew louder every day. And soon, he hit rock bottom. One day, after a long shift spraying bugs, David came home, collapsed on the couch, and turned on the TV. What he saw would change his life forever. A documentary on Navy SEALs was playing. He watched men dive into freezing water, crawl through mud, scream in agony, but never quit. These men were tough, hard, and unstoppable. Everything he wasn't. But instead of walking away, he stared at the screen and whispered to himself, "That's what I want to be." It was the most important moment of his life. In that moment, something cracked open inside him. Not motivation, but truth. He realized he was living a lie. And if he didn't change now, he would die a broken man. That night, he made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He was going to become a Navy SEAL. It didn't matter that he was 297 pounds. It didn't matter that no one believed in him. He believed in himself, just a little. And that was enough to start. From that rock-bottom moment, David Goggins rose, not with speed or ease, but with raw, relentless will. The pain hadn't broken him. It had just prepared him for the fight of his life. The SEAL documentary that changed everything. The night David Goggins stumbled upon the Navy SEAL documentary was not just a coincidence, it was destiny. Tired, overweight, and emotionally defeated, he sank into his couch with a milkshake in hand and flipped through the TV channels, expecting nothing but mindless distraction. But what filled the screen was far from ordinary. It was raw, brutal footage of Hell Week, the most infamous and punishing phase of Navy SEAL training. He watched men being pushed to their absolute physical and mental limits, running on no sleep, submerged in icy waters, carrying logs for miles, and being screamed at by instructors. Yet, they kept going. No one quit. No one complained. Every face on that screen radiated one thing: mental toughness. Something clicked. David stared at the screen, mesmerized. For the first time in years, he felt alive. Not because he admired them, but because something in him recognized them. These weren't superheroes. They were human. But they had chosen discomfort. They had chosen suffering. And that's what made them elite. That's what made them powerful. That's what I want to become, he said aloud, startling even himself. Not a SEAL necessarily, but a man who could face anything and never back down. It was a vision. A new identity. The first spark of belief. But the reality hit hard. He weighed nearly 300 pounds. He had no athletic background. His job spraying bugs at night left him exhausted and hopeless. And worse, he had just 3 months before the Navy's age cutoff. No recruiter would take him seriously. Still, he picked up the phone and started calling Navy recruiting offices. Most of them laughed. One even told him, "You'll die in training." But then he found one recruiter who didn't hang up. Instead, he gave David a challenge: lose over 100 pounds in less than 3 months, and we'll talk. It was insane. But David accepted. From that moment, the couch became his enemy. Comfort became his curse. He trashed the junk food, dusted off an old stationary bike, and forced himself to ride it for hours, even when his legs burned and sweat poured from his body like rain. He ran on painful knees. He swam when he couldn't breathe. He dieted with military discipline, eating only what was needed and starving the excuses out of his brain. Each morning, he'd stare in the mirror and say, "You're not weak. You're not a loser. You're becoming someone new." That SEAL documentary didn't just inspire David, it rewired him. It gave him a new image of what life could look like. Not easy. Not safe. But purposeful. Powerful. Alive. Every step of his brutal transformation started with that flickering screen and a moment of quiet honesty: he wasn't living. He was hiding. But not anymore. That night marked the end of the old David Goggins, and the beginning of the man who would go on to defy all odds. Losing 106 pounds in 3 months, the impossible transformation. David Goggins was nearly 300 pounds. He was broken, depressed, and suffocating in a body that didn't reflect the warrior spirit buried deep within him. One day, he saw a Navy SEAL documentary that sparked something. That night, he looked in the mirror and said the words that would change his life: "You are not who you are supposed to be." He had just 3 months left before the SEAL's recruitment deadline. And he needed to lose over 100 pounds. Everyone said it was impossible. Goggins didn't care. He created a plan that no trainer or doctor would recommend. It was ruthless, extreme, and painful. He woke up at 4:30 a.m., rode a stationary bike for 2 hours before work, went to a full-time pest control job, then ran or walked until nightfall. His shins were splintering, his knees ached, and his lungs burned. But he kept going. His diet was just as unforgiving. No sugar. No fast food. He survived on chicken, vegetables, water, and discipline. Hunger gnawed at him every day, but he welcomed it. It meant his body was changing. Goggins didn't allow himself one cheat meal or excuse. Every bite was a war between weakness and willpower. To keep himself mentally sharp, he invented what he called the accountability mirror. He wrote down brutal truths about himself: you're fat, you're lazy, you're afraid, and stuck them to the mirror. But beside them, he wrote goals: run 5 miles tomorrow, don't quit, be better. These notes didn't lie or comfort him. They challenged him. Every morning and night, they reminded him of what was at stake. Most people around him didn't believe he could do it. But their doubt became fuel. When the pain got too much, he thought about the version of himself he hated, and ran harder. When he was tempted to quit, he reminded himself of the Navy SEALs he wanted to join, their discipline, their strength, their mental armor. He didn't want to just be like them, he wanted to outwork them. Day by day, the weight came off. Slowly at first, then rapidly. His energy returned. His confidence grew. The mirror that once mocked him now reflected someone he respected. After 90 days of torture, he stepped on the scale. He had lost 106 pounds. Mission complete. When he walked into the Navy recruiter's office, he wasn't the same man. He wasn't just lighter, he was stronger in every way. He had done what most thought was impossible. Not because of talent or luck, but because of relentless discipline and mental toughness. Goggins proved a lesson most ignore: if you're willing to suffer, stay consistent, and push past what you think is your limit, you can do anything. The journey of losing 106 pounds wasn't just about fat loss. It was the rebirth of a warrior. Hell Week, embracing the suffering. Hell Week is the ultimate test in Navy SEAL training, 5.5 days of relentless physical and mental punishment with less than 4 hours of sleep total. For most, it's a nightmare. For David Goggins, it was a proving ground. After losing over 100 pounds to qualify, Goggins knew this was where the real battle began. The cold water, brutal runs, endless push-ups, and non-stop drills were designed to break candidates down. And it did. Many quit within hours. But Goggins had already suffered more in his life than most ever would: abuse, racism, obesity, and fear. Pain was nothing new. What made him different was that he didn't just endure it, he welcomed it. During Hell Week, Goggins fractured his kneecap. He was coughing up blood. His body was shutting down. But he kept going. While others looked for a way out, he searched for strength in the suffering. He had built what he called a cookie jar in his mind, a place filled with memories of every obstacle he had ever overcome. Every time he wanted to quit, he pulled from it. "I've been here before," he reminded himself. "And I survived." Hell Week didn't break Goggins, it forged him. He learned that the mind is the most powerful weapon of all. Pain is temporary. Weakness is a choice. And limits are just an illusion. When it was over, Goggins didn't just finish, he stood taller, stronger, and mentally invincible. Hell Week wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something greater. Callousing the mind, the art of mental strength. After surviving Hell Week, most people would rest. But David Goggins didn't slow down, instead, he leaned deeper into discomfort. He realized that just like hands build calluses from hard work, the mind could also develop calluses from enduring pain, struggle, and fear. He called this process, callousing the mind, a mental transformation through voluntary suffering and relentless repetition. Goggins began setting impossible challenges for himself, not to impress others, but to reshape his mind. He ran ultramarathons with stress fractures, trained on broken legs, and pushed through injuries most people would consider disabling. Every time he felt pain, doubt, or weakness, he reminded himself, this is the moment where growth happens. He understood that strength isn't built when things are easy, it's built in the fire. Mental calluses are formed when we do the things we don't want to do. Goggins believed in embracing the suck, confronting the voice in your head that says, stop, and telling it, not today. He'd wake up at 4 a.m., run miles in the freezing cold, then go to work, then train again at night. Day after day. No excuses. No shortcuts. Just brutal honesty with himself and a hunger for more. He wasn't just training his body, he was sharpening his mind into a weapon. Goggins believed the mind, when properly conditioned, can endure anything. When most people hit 40% of their potential, they stop. But he knew how to push to 100%. Callousing the mind became Goggins' blueprint for life. Every hardship became another layer of strength. Every setback, a chance to build resilience. The more life hit him, the tougher his mind became. Accountability mirror, facing your weakness. One of David Goggins' most powerful tools in building mental toughness wasn't in the gym or on the battlefield, it was in his bathroom. Every morning, he would stare into what he called the accountability mirror. This wasn't just a piece of glass, it was a place of truth, confrontation, and self-correction. Goggins didn't use it to admire his appearance. He used it to face his flaws head-on. He wrote sticky notes and slapped them on the mirror, honest assessments of his shortcomings. You're fat. You're lazy. You're not doing enough. Harsh. Yes. But Goggins believed sugarcoating reality was the fastest way to stay weak. He knew that growth only came through radical honesty. Every note became a challenge, a promise to fix something, to push harder, to stop lying to himself. The accountability mirror was where excuses died. When others blamed the world for their problems, Goggins looked within. He owned his failures, his pain, his choices. No victim mindset. No denial. Just truth and action. He turned the mirror into a personal war room. Each morning, he read those notes and attacked the day with purpose. Every time he overcame one weakness, he replaced the note with a new challenge. It became a never-ending loop of accountability, progress, and personal growth. This habit taught him the most valuable lesson of all: you cannot change what you refuse to confront. By facing his truth daily, he forged the discipline to evolve. Goggins didn't wait for motivation. He created it. He didn't chase comfort. He crushed it. The accountability mirror wasn't magic. It was mindset. And for Goggins, it was the weapon that turned brutal honesty into unstoppable strength. The 40% rule, going beyond limits. David Goggins introduced one of his most famous mental frameworks, the 40% rule. According to Goggins, when your mind tells you you're done, when you're exhausted, frustrated, and feel like quitting, you're only at 40% of your actual potential. The remaining 60% is untapped reserve power, locked behind pain, fear, and doubt. This rule isn't scientific, it's psychological. Goggins discovered it while pushing through physical hell during SEAL training and ultra-endurance races. When others quit, he kept going, not because he was superhuman, but because he realized that quitting is often a mental decision, not a physical necessity. To apply the 40% rule, Goggins trained himself to recognize the quitting voice, then ignore it. Every time his brain said, "Stop," he told himself, "You've got more. Keep moving." Whether running a 100-mile race or grinding through midnight workouts, he proved that our true limits are much further than we think. The 40% rule became a mindset weapon. It reminded him, and now millions worldwide, that the mind is the true battlefield. You don't need more strength. You need more will. And once you learn to silence that voice, you unlock greatness. Here is Chapter 10, Embracing the Suck, Finding Strength in Suffering in approximately 200 words. Embracing the suck, finding strength in suffering. David Goggins coined the term, "embrace the suck," to describe the brutal truth of growth. You must willingly walk into pain to become stronger. For Goggins, suffering wasn't something to avoid, it was something to seek out and conquer. He believed that greatness lives on the other side of discomfort. During Navy SEAL Hell Week, when others were breaking mentally and physically, Goggins leaned into the pain. Whether submerged in freezing water or carrying logs up hills, he saw suffering as his advantage. Most people run from the hard things. Goggins ran toward them because he knew the suck was temporary, but the strength it created was permanent. He treated every miserable moment, injuries, setbacks, harsh conditions, not as punishment, but as training. Each hardship became fuel for his unbreakable mindset. He didn't ask, "Why me?" He asked, "What can I learn from this?" That shift made him unstoppable. Goggins proved that when you stop avoiding suffering and start owning it, you unlock a rare kind of power, mental toughness that no one can give you and no one can take away. To embrace the suck is to choose purpose over comfort. And that's where real transformation begins. Callousing the mind, repetition builds resilience. David Goggins often speaks about callousing the mind, a concept drawn from his physical experiences. Just like hands develop calluses from lifting heavy weights or doing hard labor, the mind can also be hardened through repeated exposure to struggle and discomfort. Every challenge Goggins faced became an opportunity to toughen his mental skin. The process was simple but brutal. Do the hard things over and over again until they become normal. Waking up early. Running on broken feet. Studying despite learning disabilities. Training while injured. Goggins didn't wait for motivation, he relied on repetition. The more he endured, the less intimidating pain became. Each act of discipline added a mental callus. Each refusal to quit, each step beyond the quitting point, hardened his mindset. He believed that consistency under pressure was more important than talent or luck. Over time, his brain stopped panicking under stress. It expected discomfort and pushed through it. Callousing the mind is not about avoiding pain, it's about welcoming it until it no longer controls you. Through repetition, Goggins transformed obstacles into training, and suffering into strength. His resilience was not a gift. It was earned, one painful step at a time. Accountability mirror, facing your truth. One of David Goggins' most powerful tools wasn't a coach or a mentor, it was a simple mirror. He called it the accountability mirror, a place where he stood face to face with his failures, weaknesses, and excuses. Every night, he forced himself to look into that mirror and tell the brutal truth, where he was falling short, where he needed to improve, and what lies he was telling himself. For Goggins, this mirror was not about self-love or affirmation. It was about ownership. He would write sticky notes and post them on the mirror with messages like, "You're fat, you're lazy," or "You're not working hard enough." It sounds harsh, but that was the point. Growth begins when excuses end. The mirror didn't allow him to lie to himself. By embracing self-honesty, Goggins created a habit of radical self-assessment. He didn't sugarcoat his performance. He held himself to the highest standard, even when no one else was watching. The accountability mirror wasn't just about discipline, it was about taking full responsibility for his life, choices, and future. True transformation, Goggins believed, starts when you stop blaming the world and start looking inward. The mirror doesn't lie, and neither should you. The cookie jar, finding power in the past. David Goggins developed a mental strategy he called the cookie jar. Unlike the sweet treats most people think of, Goggins' cookie jar was filled with something far more powerful, memories of past victories, hardships overcome, and moments of resilience. Whenever he was on the verge of quitting, mentally broken, or physically crushed, he reached into this jar to remind himself of who he truly was. The cookie jar held everything from his brutal Navy SEAL training, surviving childhood abuse, running ultramarathons on broken feet, to passing military schools that nearly killed him. Each memory was a cookie, proof that he had already endured the unimaginable, and that he could do it again. In moments of pain and weakness, the human mind searches for reasons to stop. Goggins trained himself to counter those voices with evidence, his own history of survival. The cookie jar gave him mental fuel when his body was failing. It was a reminder, you've been through worse, and you didn't quit then. By building this arsenal of victories, Goggins created instant motivation, sourced not from fantasy, but from reality. The cookie jar became his emotional ammunition. When pain screamed loudest, his past whispered louder, you can survive this. Stretching the limits, physical pain, mental gain. David Goggins believed that the human body has untapped potential buried beneath layers of comfort, fear, and doubt, and he was determined to unlock every inch of it. One of his most intense tools for building resilience was something deceptively simple, daily stretching. But this wasn't just about flexibility, it was about discipline, routine, and controlling pain. Goggins suffered from intense injuries due to years of pushing his body beyond normal limits, broken feet, stress fractures, tight psoas muscles, and more. Most people would use that as an excuse to rest. Goggins turned it into an opportunity to train his mind. For hours every day, he'd sit through agonizing stretching routines, often when he was already exhausted. It wasn't about the physical benefit alone, it was about embracing discomfort and creating discipline from it. Each painful hold became a meditation in suffering, a daily ritual that reminded him growth comes from deliberate pain. While others sought rest, Goggins found growth in grind. He didn't stretch to relax, he stretched to fight his limits, to reinforce the mindset that comfort is the enemy of greatness. Through this practice, Goggins taught himself one powerful truth: if you want to be uncommon, you must do the uncommon, every single day. The accountability mirror, brutal honesty. One of David Goggins' most transformative tools wasn't found in a gym, a battlefield, or a book, it was his bathroom mirror. He called it the accountability mirror, and it became the foundation of his transformation. Every night, Goggins would stand in front of it, look himself in the eyes, and tell himself the harsh truths no one else dared to say. He didn't sugarcoat his failures. He didn't make excuses. He used sticky notes to label what needed to change, whether it was his weight, work ethic, or mindset. The mirror didn't reflect just his face, it reflected his integrity. To Goggins, honesty was a superpower. In a world where people protect their egos at all costs, he shattered his own every day to build a stronger version of himself. The mirror held him accountable, not to society, but to the man he wanted to become. Every insult he once heard growing up, about being dumb, slow, weak, he turned into fuel. He posted reminders. He gave himself assignments. And he made sure he executed. The accountability mirror wasn't about self-hate, it was about self-respect. If you can't face yourself, Goggins said, you'll never fix yourself. And if you can't fix yourself, you'll never become the person you were meant to be. How David Goggins built unbreakable mental toughness is now complete.